Okay, let's see here. Let's do this. There we go. Well, good morning, everyone, for episode 100. I am Dr. Jeff Evenson, board certified doctor of holistic health. I am not a medical doctor. I don't pretend to be one. I don't practice medicine. Instead, I help people get their health back through natural and holistic means, and without drugs or surgery. Okay, let me hit my comments here. Good morning, Christine, my love. And I turned on the comments, so if people are joining, coming up, comment in, make a comment, or where you're watching from. This is a milestone episode for me, and we'll talk about that. But I've got a lot of content that I want to talk about on this episode. This is huge. I've been pretty excited about coming on and talking about what this is. So let's, oh, and plus it is a glorious day here in Minnesota. I'm streaming live from my home office on the homestead, and I think the temperature is going to be a high of 68. The sun is out. The birds are making music out there. What a truly blessing of a day that we can, hopefully, all of us get out there and enjoy together. After the show, of course, I wouldn't want you to miss this content. Okay. So here we are. I call this first segment, I'm calling it, it's, of course, my welcome and the weight of 100. Okay, 100 episodes. So good morning. Let's get into it. And welcome to Morning Coffee with Doc Jeff. Grab your coffee. This one's going to be a little different. Okay, most mornings I come in here, we sit down together, we dig into something, a health topic, a clinical concept, something I'm seeing with clients, something I think you may need to hear that you're probably not hearing anywhere else. That's the show. That's what I do. And I love doing it. Okay. But today is episode 100. And testing, can you hear me? Yep. Okay. Today's episode 100. So I've been sitting with that number for a while now. I've been talking about it for weeks. 100 episodes. When I think back to where this started, why I started showing up in front of a camera and just talking, it wasn't because I had a content strategy or a marketing plan. It way far from that. It was because I had something to say and I believed the right people needed to hear it. And I remember, and I was just telling Christine this story, we were FaceTiming this morning. I remember standing in my kitchen back in April of 2024, maybe 2020, yeah, 20, I don't know, it's been a while. And I had a cup of coffee in my hand and I thought, I've got a lot of stuff rolling around in my head I want to share. I'm just going to go live. And I sat down, had no script, no plan, no nothing, and just sat down, went live. And that became the show. That kind of kicked it off. And I've been doing it essentially almost every Saturday morning now for 100 episodes. Had a few breaks here and there, a few episodes I missed, or a few weekends that I missed, but I want the right people to hear this content. People who are stuck often, people who had been through the conventional medical system and came out the other side with nothing but a diagnosis that they didn't want and a prescription they didn't trust. Okay? People who knew something was wrong and couldn't get a straight answer about why. I wanted to have the conversations that weren't being had, the honest ones, the ones that go deeper than symptom management and lab ranges and whatever the current pharmaceutical guidelines say this week. And somewhere in the middle of just showing up and doing that consistently over time, I got to 100. So today I'm doing something I've never done on the show. I'm taking you back to the very beginning. Not to the beginning of the practice, not to the board certifications that I went through, or the Q&T assessments, or any of the things we talk about regularly. Okay? All the way back to before any of that existed. I'm going to take you back to a room in Ely, Minnesota, which is three hours further north from where I'm at. It's way up north in northern Minnesota, where a very skeptical, very analytical, very certain man sat there watching something he could not explain and couldn't look away from. That moment cracked something open in me that has never closed. Okay? And I have never told the full story on the show. Not like this. So I want to walk you through the entire journey today, where muscle testing came from historically, okay? What it actually is and how it works. How my clinical toolkit evolved over 17 years of practice, from nutrition response testing to quantum nutrition testing to morphogenic field technique to the cell core muscle testing protocols. What that kind of sustained daily practice does to a practitioner over time. What it opened up in me clinically, perceptually, and spiritually. Because here's what I can tell you from the other side of 17 years. The muscle test is not just a clinical tool. It never was. It's a doorway. And what's on the other side of that doorway is something I couldn't have imagined sitting in that room in Ely trying to catch someone cheating. And in 2011, I wrote my master's thesis at Goddard College. I titled it A New Normal, A Practitioner's Journey of Understanding Muscle Testing. At that time, I was 2 years into practice. I was trying to make intellectual sense of something that had already changed my life. I was a retired Navy cryptologist turned cybersecurity professional who turned into alternative healer. And I needed to understand the mechanics of what I was doing. I needed the science, the theory, the framework. And the conclusion I landed on after 130 pages of research and reflection was this: the muscle test is an agreement of interplay between expressions of the universe. I wrote that sentence 15 years ago. I believed it then, but I had no idea yet what it actually meant. Not really. Today I do. 100 episodes in, 15 years of practice behind me since then, a board certification as Doctor of Holistic Health, thousands of clients, and a spiritual journey I never saw coming. Today I can tell you what that sentence means from the inside. And this is episode 100. And this is the story of the doorway. So let's go. Okay. Grab a sip of your coffee. If you're just joining the show, please comment in the chats where you're watching from. And maybe how long you've been watching. I really appreciate it. All right. So the segment I'm calling Ely, Minnesota. I want to set the stage here. The skeptic in the room, okay? That was me, if you haven't figured that out. Let me take you back to 2009, okay? At this point in my life, I'm deep into a career in cybersecurity. I was retired 20 years as a Navy chief, cryptologist behind me. I was in information warfare, intelligence, network systems, operating environments where if you got it wrong, people paid a serious price. Okay. After the Navy, I moved into senior information security leadership, doing financial services. I was working with telecommunications. I did SOX compliance, HIPAA compliance, enterprise architecture. I was a systems thinker, okay? A precision thinker. I trusted data. I trusted evidence. I trusted what it could verify, document, and defend. I did not trust things I couldn't explain. And that's not a character flaw, okay? That's just the operating system I had been running for 30 plus years of professional life. Skepticism wasn't a personality quirk for me, it was a professional discipline. And in my world, skepticism kept people safe. So when I tell you what happened next, I want you to understand who is sitting in that room. Not a curious, open-minded wellness enthusiast. I was not. I was a Navy chief, a cybersecurity professional, and a man who had spent his entire career being paid to find the flaw in the system. So here we are. Someone close to me had been dealing with a chronic digestive issue for the better part of a year. And anything they ate seemed to cause a problem. The conventional medical system had done what the conventional medical system does. They ran every test they could bill for, charged the insurance company a significant amount of money, scratched their heads, and eventually landed on a diagnosis. Fructose intolerance. That's what they called it. The guidance that came with it was essentially this. Nobody really knew what it was, but here's what they told this person. You can no longer eat fruit, vegetables, or anything containing sugar or things that would convert to sugar in your body. And she's asked a simple question after that, well, for how long? And they said, for the rest of your life. We had other questions, and the doctor didn't know how to answer them, and he got frustrated and instead sent us to go see the dietitian. So we went to see a dietitian at the hospital to understand what that actually meant practically. What could be eaten? How to navigate it? And we left that appointment shaking our heads. The dietitian did not have a solid grasp of the very condition she was supposed to be counseling us on. Questions were met with uncertainty. Recommendations included foods that directly contradicted the diagnosis. Much like the food system was recommending, even today the government recommends, or the American Diabetics Association recommends all kinds of carbs and shit and sugar that we know is going to just exacerbate the diabetic problem. So there we are, met with the same kind of information. And we walked out knowing less than when we walked in. This is the system I was trusting with the health of someone I cared about. We needed a break. So we went up north and rented a cabin up in Ely, Minnesota. And it was a place, and we would do this annually, rent a cabin for a week and just go up there to decompress, disconnect, and reconnect. Okay? It's beautiful country up there. And if you've never been to Ely, you're missing out on something. Okay? Small town, North Woods. It's the kind of place that reminds you the world is bigger and quieter than the one that you normally live in. So a couple days in, we come across a flyer to a small wellness center in town, and they were offering a full natural health assessment. Alternative, natural, the whole thing was $99. Now, under normal circumstances back home, back in regular life, there is no version of me that walks through that door. Okay? Zero. But we were on vacation. We're in a different headspace. And frankly, the conventional system had already shown us what it had to offer. So we made the call. And the next day, we walked into the Evergreen Cottage Wellness Center up in Ely. And the center, it was an old renovated house, charming in a worn-in kind of way. It's still there, and Sonia's still practicing. It had the original brass door hardware, creaky stairs. The smell of the place reminded me of my grandparents' home. We were shown to a waiting room, filled out some paperwork, and met our practitioner. Her name was Sonia. She's a dear friend to this day, a mentor. She has an Austrian accent because she's from Austria. Ostrich. Warm, focused. She was completely unhurried. Okay. And so Sonia started with something called a biomeridian assessment. And what that is, it's a device that measures electrical impedance at acupuncture points on the body. And in one hand, you hold a copper tube, and then she has a probe that touches various points on your skin. And the time it takes for the electrical signal to travel tells you something about the energetic status of the corresponding organ systems. Okay. It showed up on a computer screen in real time, color graphs, tangible data. I could work with that. It was unusual, but it had instrumentation behind it, and I could rationalize it. And then Sonia asked us to lie down on the treatment table. She was now going to perform nutrition response testing. Okay. And I'm raising an eyebrow, of course. She explained how the muscle test worked. She extended the arm. I'll show you, I'll post up a little picture here. This is, of course, not at the time, but she extended the arm. Okay. Let's see if I can't squeak into the picture there. All right. So she extended the arm, applied light pressure to the frontal deltoid, the shoulder muscle, and demonstrated how the arm would either hold strong or drop weak, depending on what she was testing simultaneously with her other hand against various points on the body. She called it the indicator muscle. And strong meant the body's energy was holding, if you could hold the arm strong. And weak meant something was stressing that system. Okay. So I sat in the corner of that room and I watched. Okay. And I want to be honest with you about what I was doing. I was not watching with an open mind. Okay. I was watching the way I had been trained to watch. I was looking for the trick. I was waiting for the tell. I was analyzing every movement, every pressure, every subtle shift in body language between Sonia and the person on the table. And I told myself I was going to catch this. I was going to find the point where the illusion broke down, trying to defeat the test from across the room. And then something happened I could not explain. Sonia identified specific nutritional deficiencies and stressors in the body accurately. Things that aligned with symptoms that had been present for months. Things the conventional system had either missed entirely or dismissed. She identified them through the muscle test. No blood draw, no imaging, no lab panel, okay? Through the response of the body to specific stimuli applied with her hand. And I sat there and I could not find the flaw. I tried. I genuinely tried because I needed there to be a flaw. A man who has built his entire professional identity on rigorous skepticism does not want to sit in a room in Ely, Minnesota and discover that everything he thought he knew about about how the body communicates has a gap in it the size of a canyon. But I couldn't find it. And here's what I remember most clearly about that moment. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't a sudden conversion. It was something quieter than that and more unsettling. It was the feeling of a foundational assumption giving way. Not collapsing dramatically, just shifting. Like something that had been load-bearing for 30 years quietly stepping aside. I walked out of that room a different man than I walked in. I didn't know it yet fully, but the door had opened. I just didn't know yet what was on the other side of it. So, what muscle testing actually is, you heard me talk about muscle testing. And a lot of people will raise an eyebrow, just as I did, as I explained. I'm like, what the hell is that? You know, and so I'm going to talk about what muscle testing actually is. All right. So I walked out of that room in Ely, and I did what any self-respecting Navy cryptologist, cybersecurity professional would do. I went home and I started researching, because that's how I'm wired. I don't sit comfortably with things that I can't explain. I go find an explanation. I pulled the thread until I understand what I'm looking at. And what I was looking at was something called muscle testing. And I needed to know everything about it. Where it came from, how it worked, why it worked, whether the science supported it, or whether I had just been taken in by a very convincing performance in a charming old house in northern Minnesota. What I found surprised me, because this wasn't new. Not even close. Okay? Even if I have any practitioners listening, I have some history for you here that you may not know. So let me give you the actual history, because I think it matters. Most people who encounter muscle testing for the first time assume it's some kind of alternative medicine invention from the 1970s. Okay? Something that showed up alongside crystals and incense and people talking about chakras. That's not what it is. Manual muscle testing, the foundational technique, dates back to 1912. That's over 100 years ago. It was developed as a clinical tool for grading the strength of postural muscles in patients with polio and other neuromuscular diseases. Okay? Physical therapists and neurologists were using it to assess nervous system function. It was standard clinical practice. Nobody was arguing about whether it was real. It was a recognized diagnostic tool in conventional medicine. That history matters because it tells you something important. The muscle test isn't fringe science pretending to be medicine. It has a legitimate clinical root. What happened over time is that those roots got extended into territory that conventional medicine wasn't prepared to follow. And that's where the controversy starts. But the foundation is solid. 100+ years of clinical application, solid. So now fast forward to 1964. This is where most people pick up the story. Okay. A chiropractor named Dr. George Goodhart is practicing in Detroit, and he makes a discovery that changes everything. He finds a technique that can immediately make a muscle that tests weak test strong. Not through exercise, not through physical rehabilitation, through specific interventions. He could do adjustments, he could do nutritional support, he could do acupressure, and he realizes that he's found something significant. The muscle response isn't just measuring strength, it's measuring the functional status of the nervous system and the organ systems connected to it. Goodhart calls his system applied kinesiology, AK for short. Now, kinesiology itself, with no modifier in front of it, is simply the study of human movement. How muscles move, range of motion, the biomechanics. Physical therapists work in kinesiology. Athletic trainers work in kinesiology. It's an academic discipline with a straightforward definition. Applied kinesiology is something different. The International College of Applied Kinesiology defines it as a system that evaluates structural, chemical, and mental aspects of health using manual muscle testing combined with other standard methods of diagnosis. It's structural, chemical, mental. 3 dimensions of health assessed through the muscle response. That's a significant expansion from measuring polio patients in 1912. And because Goodhart introduced AK as a chiropractic clinical concept, chiropractors became the primary practitioners of it. And it spread through the chiropractic profession and from there into other health fields. Which is why when I started looking into this after Ely, most of what I found was being practiced by chiropractors. I decided early on that I was going to break that mold. I wasn't a chiropractor. I didn't intend to become one. But I believed in what I had witnessed and what I believed it could stand, and I believed it could stand on its own outside of a chiropractic context. That decision defined the trajectory of my entire practice. My entry point into muscle testing was through nutrition response testing, NRT. And NRT was developed by Dr. Freddie Ulan through Ulan Nutritional Systems. Okay? NRT takes the applied kinesiology framework and applies it specifically to the assessment of the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, and the identification of nutritional imbalances, stressors, and deficiencies driving dysfunction in the body. So let me explain how it actually works because I want you to understand this clearly. The autonomic nervous system is the master regulator of your body. It controls everything that happens without your conscious direction. Heart rate, digestion, immune response, hormone regulation, organ function. It operates in 2 primary modes. Sympathetic, which is the accelerator, your fight or flight response. And then there's the parasympathetic, which is the brake, your rest and digest state. Health requires the ability to move fluidly between those 2 states and regulate appropriately. And when that regulation breaks down, you get dysfunction. And dysfunction, when left unaddressed long enough, becomes disease. So the muscle test gives us a window into that system. And here's the mechanics. The practitioner uses what's called an indicator muscle. Typically the frontal, as I said, I'll put that back up on the stage. This might be a better picture here. Close up. Okay. Typically, let's see here. All right. Typically the frontal deltoid, which is your shoulder muscle, the client extends their arm and holds it against light pressure applied by the practitioner. Okay. That's the baseline where the arm holds strong. Now, The practitioner's other hand comes into play. While maintaining light pressure on the indicator muscle, the practitioner contacts specific acupressure points on the client's body, points that correspond to specific organ systems through the meridian system. And we've all seen that identified through acupuncture. If the body's energy is holding strong at that point, the indicator muscle stays strong. If there is a stress or a weakness at that point, the indicator muscle goes weak and the arm drops. Okay? And that is called therapy localization. Whichever point I'm touching on the body, if I touch a point, the arm drops, I just therapy localized that point. Okay? And what that is, the body's essentially flagging its own areas of stress. Then comes the challenge. The practitioner introduces specific stimuli, which could be in the form of nutritional supplements. It could be toxins, pathogens into the body's energy field while holding those acupressure points. And the muscle response tells you whether that substance is something the body needs, something it's burdened by, or something neutral. A strong response to a nutrient means the body recognizes it as something that will support the stressed system. That's your clinical information. That's how you build an individualized nutritional protocol without guessing. There's no blood draw, there's no imaging, the body tells you directly. Now, I want to address something before we go any further, because I know some of you are sitting with the same skepticism that I had in that room in Ely. Okay? The conventional medical system, medical community, has pushed back hard on muscle testing. The primary argument is something called the ideomotor response. That the idea that subtle unconscious movements by the practitioner are influencing test results. Okay? That the whole thing is an elaborate form of confirmation bias being acted out through micro movements neither party is aware of. It's not a stupid argument. Okay? I took it seriously and I researched it thoroughly. And here's what I found. The ideomotor response doesn't hold as a complete explanation. It accounts for some potential for error in poorly trained practitioners using sloppy techniques. Okay? But it does not account for the consistency of results across practitioners, across clinical settings, and across the body of observational evidence that has accumulated over decades of practice. It doesn't account for what I witnessed in Ely. And it certainly doesn't account for what I've witnessed in 17 years of clinical practice with thousands of clients. What it does tell you is that training matters. Precision matters. Consistent technique matters. The practitioners teaching NRT understood this, and the drilling of technique in their courses was not bureaucratic. It was clinical discipline. You cannot bring bias into this work and get reliable results. The practitioner has to be clean, present, and intentional. Which brings me to something I wrote in my master's thesis in 2011 that I want to share with you. After 130 pages of research, historical, scientific, phenomenological, quantum, I landed on this conclusion and I centered it on the page and I bolded it because I wanted it to stand alone. And you heard me say it earlier in the show. The muscle test is an agreement of interplay between expressions of the universe. I want you to sit with that for a second. It's not a measurement. It's not a test in the conventional diagnostic sense. It's an agreement. Something happening between two living systems that are both expressions of something larger than either of them. The practitioner and client aren't subject and object. They're participants in a shared inquiry. I believed that when I wrote it. I had the research to support the framework. I had 2 years of clinical experience beginning to confirm it. But I'll be honest with you, in 2011, I was still largely in my head about it. I understood it intellectually. I could defend it academically. What I didn't yet have was 15 more years of daily practice that would take that sentence out of my head and put it somewhere much deeper. All right. So I'm going to pause here for just a second. All right. If you happen to be joining the show, make sure you pop into the comments and say hi. Tell us where you're watching from. There we go. I pasted segment 3 twice into my notes, and I got to the next segment. I'm like, wait a minute, I just went through that. Yeah, I don't ever expect perfection, folks, when I do my shows. I take it in stride. Things go, they're either going to go well or they're not, and I just roll with it. Hey, Christine. Christine is watching from Anemia. I appreciate you tuning in. It's interesting, we have 2 Christines on. One spelled with a C and the other spelled with a K. And Christine with a C is watching from Rensselaer, Indiana. All right, so let's talk about the evolution, expanding through the doorway. Okay, so here's where I need to tell you something about how I'm wired. Okay, I don't stop. Once a door opens, I'm going to walk through it. Okay, if you know me at all, if you open the door and you tell me not to go through there, I'm going to go through the fucking door. Okay. And once I'm through it, I start looking for the next one. That's not restlessness, okay? That's not dissatisfaction with what I have. It's something closer to a calling, a pull forward toward whatever is true and whatever works and whatever serves my clients at the highest level I'm capable of. That operating principle has defined 17 years of practice. And it's why what I do today looks significantly different from what I was doing when I first opened my doors. I want to walk you through that evolution, okay? Not as a biography, but as a clinical story, because each step forward isn't arbitrary. Each expansion of my toolkit was driven by something I was encountering in the room with clients that my current tools weren't fully addressing. The body kept showing me there was more, and I kept following it. So let's start at the beginning, okay? As NRT, nutrition response testing, NRT was my foundation, and I still practice with it today. After Ely, I went and got trained in nutrition response testing. I came into it skeptical. I drilled the technique and I watched it work consistently enough that I couldn't rationalize it away. I built my entire early practice around it. I opened the doors of natural pathways in North Mankato in 2009. Eventually moved to Finlayson, where I'm at, and established the Evenson Holistic Natural Health Center. NRT gave me the clinical language that I needed, the ANS assessment, the autonomic nervous system assessment, the indicator muscle protocol, therapy, localization, and challenge, the ability to identify specific nutritional deficiencies and stressors and match them to whole food supplementation that the body confirmed it needed. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't running labs and interpreting ranges. I was asking the body directly, and the body was answering. And from the very beginning, that inquiry included frequency vials. This is something most people don't realize about NRT. It's not purely a physical hands-on assessment. Okay, I think I have a picture of those. Let me put the oops. Let's go back. So right there, these are frequency vials. Okay, I'll make the picture big enough so you can kind of see them. And these vials all are programmed with a different frequency. Okay, they're vials carrying the energetic signature of specific nutrients, toxins, pathogens, and stressors. And they're introduced into a body's energy field during the muscle test. Okay, the body responds to the frequency, not the physical substance, but the informational signature that it carries in that frequency. And the body's going to go strong or weak, needed or not needed, burdening the system or neutral to it. Okay. I was working at the field level from day one. I just didn't have the full conceptual framework yet to articulate what that meant. The body was communicating through its field, and I was listening. I was just calling it something different at the time. And what's interesting is science has measured the body's energy field, electromagnetic field, at least 2 to 3 feet outside of the body. Okay, this is a little bit of a segue or aside. And there's a device that has measured heart energy, the frequency of the heart, at least 12 feet away outside of the body. That's fascinating to me. Okay, and so we're interplay. This is where that interplay comes, that dance that I was talking about earlier, because the frequency of that's in these vials, when I move that into a person's energy field, the muscle response is going to go strong, stay weak. It's going to change based on what we're testing for. Okay. The results speak for themselves. Clients who had been stuck for years started moving. Conditions that conventional medicine had labeled chronic and permanent started responding. Not because I was treating the condition, but because I was identifying and addressing the upstream causes the condition was downstream of. Okay, that's the NRT framework. Regulation before correction. Get the body's system stabilized and communicating correctly before you try to fix anything specific. And that's a sound clinical philosophy, and it remains the backbone of everything that I do. I start every one of my clients out in phase 1, and that's exactly what we're working on. We're working to get the body's systems stabilized and communicating correctly. And to do that, sometimes we have to work on removing the toxins, the pathogens, the immune challenges, the parasites, all of the things that interfere with the body. We've got to move that out of the way before we can start feeding the body properly. But NRT, as powerful as it is, has boundaries. And over time, I started bumping into them. Okay. The deeper that I went with clients, the more I realized there were layers the standard NRT protocol, even the advanced protocols, weren't reaching. Questions the test could ask but not fully answer within the framework that I had been given. I needed more precision, more range, and a wider aperture of inquiry. Okay. And I expanded out and was doing much of this inquiry on my own through my own discoveries. But it's eventually what led me to quantum nutrition testing. Okay. So let's talk about quantum nutrition testing. Q&T is the evolution of what I do. It builds on the NRT foundation, but it extends the scope of inquiry significantly. The underlying mechanism is the same. Okay, the muscle test as the window into the body's innate intelligence, or the practitioner can do quantum nutrition testing remotely using their fingers as indicator muscles for a person. I'm going to save that for another discussion. Okay. But the muscle test is the window into the body's innate intelligence. It's the biofeedback mechanism that gives us information. But the questions being asked are broader, okay? The systems being assessed are more comprehensive, and the clinical picture that emerges is more complete. And with Q&T, I'm not just looking at nutritional deficiencies and basic organ stress. I'm working with a more sophisticated understanding of the body as a layered system. I'm looking at the physical, the biochemical, the neurological, the emotional, and beyond. The assessment captures more of what's actually driving dysfunction in a complex case. And in my experience, the cases that find their way to me are almost never simple. Q&T also demanded more of me as a practitioner, more precision, more presence, more trust in what was coming through the test rather than what I expected to find. That demand made me better, I think. It pushed my clinical development in ways that staying comfortable with NRT alone never would have. But I want to be clear about something. Q&T isn't a product somebody sold me. It's a methodology I developed and refined through years of clinical practice, continuing education, and a commitment to following the evidence wherever it led. Dr. Lisa Palmer is the founder of quantum nutrition testing, and she was the first one to really put together the processes that needed to be in place to bring in all of the conceptual things that I had been discovering on my own. And following and connecting up with Dr. Lisa Palmer's teachings and trainings and mentoring really opened the door and helped me organize, get my own thoughts organized and my own techniques and processes into place. And since I've done that, my practice has exploded. It's a methodology developed and refined through years of clinical practice, continuing education, and a commitment to following the evidence wherever it led. It carries it. I can't understand my writing in my notes. All right. So every client who has sat across from me has contributed to what Q&T is today, to what my practice is today. And that's not a marketing statement, okay? That's the truth of how clinical mastery actually develops. But even with Q&T, there were things showing up in clients that pointed beyond the nutritional and biochemical layers, okay? Things that didn't fully resolve even when the nutrition was dialed in, even when the ANS was regulating, even when the standard stressors had been addressed. A layer underneath the layer. A field around the body that the physical test alone wasn't fully reaching, and that's where I encountered the morphogenic field technique. Okay, and I'll be upfront with you, this is the one I talk about least with clients, not because I lack confidence in it, because it requires a conceptual framework that most people haven't been given, and I'd rather get results than spend half an appointment explaining the mechanism. Okay, but since we're here and this is episode 100, and we're telling the full story, here it is. MFT operates through the morphic field, the informational field that surrounds and permeates the physical body. This concept has roots in the work of biologist Rupert Sheldrake, whose research on morphogenic resonance proposed that living systems are organized and regulated not just by biochemistry, but by field level information that operates beyond the physical. The body isn't just a collection of organs and tissues and chemical processes. It's a field, an organized informational structure that extends beyond the skin. MFT uses the muscle test to assess that field directly. The practitioner is no longer just assessing what's happening inside the physical body. They're working with the energetic and informational blueprint the physical body is organized around. And this is genuinely different tier of clinical inquiry. And I want to say something honest about it. When I first encountered MFT, I had to do some work. Not because the evidence wasn't there in the room with clients, but because my Navy-trained analytical mind had another adjustment to make. Another layer of foundational assumptions to examine. Another expansion of what I was willing to accept as real and valid and clinically significant. Okay? I made that adjustment because the results in the room demanded it. What MFT opened up clinically was access to patterns of dysfunction that weren't showing up through the physical body assessment alone. Long-standing chronic conditions that had roots in the field before they ever manifested physically. Okay? Generational patterns, deep constitutional stressors, things that the standard muscle test was pointing toward but couldn't fully reach. This is the field that quantum nutrition testing is interacting with largely. Okay? Through that field, QNT makes it easier for us to understand and work in that field as well as working at the physical layer. This also deepened my understanding of what the thesis statement I wrote in 2011 was actually saying. If the muscle test is an agreement of interplay between expressions of the universe, then the field is where that agreement lives. Okay? The physical body is the expression, the field is the language. And MFT taught me to listen at that level. Okay? And then came Cellcore Biosciences. Okay? Cellcore has a clinical framework and product line built around a specific and sophisticated understanding of chronic illness, particularly in the role of biotoxins, heavy metals, pathogens, and parasitic load in driving systemic dysfunction. And here's the clinical reality I was encountering more and more in my practice. Clients who were doing everything right. The nutrition was solid, ANS was regulating, stress was managed, lifestyle was sound, and yet they weren't getting where they needed to go. Something was holding them back at a level that standard nutritional correction wasn't reaching. And what Cellcore illuminated was the layer hiding beneath, the chronic pathogenic burden that most practitioners in the space aren't equipped to address. And we're talking about things like parasites. And I mean that clinically, not metaphorically. Heavy metal accumulation, mold and mycotoxin loads, Lyme and co-infections, the downstream effects of all of the above on mitochondrial function and cellular energy production. This is the terrain of truly complex chronic illness. The cases that have been everywhere and gotten nowhere. With Cellcore's muscle testing protocols, also make extensive use of frequency vial resonance testing. The same foundational principles I had been working with since NRT, now applied to the specific and complex terrain of chronic biotoxic and pathogenic burden. These vials that I use carry the energetic frequency signature of specific pathogens, heavy metals, mold, mycotoxins, parasites, and other stressors, and they're introduced into the body's energy field during the muscle test. The body responds to the frequency signature, present or absent, active burden or resolved, priority or not yet. What Cellcore added wasn't a new concept. It was a deeper and more sophisticated application of something that had been present in my clinical work from the beginning. The frequency vial inquiry I started with in NRT, expanded through QNT, and extended into the morphic field through MFT, Cellcore brought all of that to bear on the most complex and stubborn layer of chronic illness. The layer most practitioners never reach because they don't have the tools or the clinical framework to recognize that it's there. That continuity matters because it means the progression from NRT to QNT to MFT to Cellcore isn't a collection of unrelated techniques pulled from different toolboxes. It's a single coherent evolution. One practitioner following one principle. Listen to what the body is telling you at whatever level it's speaking, deeper and deeper over 17 years. The body was always speaking in frequencies, and I was always listening. I just kept developing the capacity to hear more of what it was saying. So let me give you the full picture of where I stand today. NRT, QNT, MFT, Cellcore. I'm a board certified doctor of holistic health, 17 years of clinical practice over that now, thousands of clients, every single one of them contributing something to the practitioner that I am today. Each technique was a door inside the door. Each one demanded more of me, more precision, more trust, more willingness to follow the clinical truth wherever it led, regardless of whether it fit the framework I walked in with. And here's what I want you to understand about that progression. It wasn't linear, okay? It wasn't a neat curriculum I worked through from beginner to advanced. It was messy and non-linear and driven by what clients were showing me in the room. The body kept revealing what it needed. I kept developing the capacity to meet it there. That's what real clinical evolution looks like. It's not a credential on the wall. If you've been in my office, I've got them hanging there. It's a practitioner being changed by the work. And which brings me to the part of the story I haven't told yet, the part that goes deeper than technique, deeper than clinical development. It's the part that I think matters most. Because here's the thing about walking through the same doorway every day for 17 years. Eventually, the doorway changes you. Good morning to Christine, watching from Steuben, Maine. I know, not Christine, I'm sorry, Teresa. I've got two Christines on. Teresa, watching from Steuben, Maine. I know Teresa, I was stationed up there back in the 80s when I was in the Navy. And that's how I came to know Teresa. All right. So becoming, this segment I called it Becoming a Clearer Instrument. All right. I want to tell you something that I don't talk about often. Not because I'm embarrassed by it, and not because I lack confidence in it, but because it sits in territory that's hard to put into words without it sounding like something it isn't. Okay. And I'd rather say nothing than say it wrong. But this is episode 100. And if there was ever a moment to say it right, this is it. Okay. Somewhere in the middle of 17 years of daily clinical practice, somewhere in the thousands of muscle tests, the thousands of hours sitting across from people in genuine suffering, the thousands of moments of placing my hands on the indicator muscle and asking the body to show me what is needed, what it needed, something changed in me that went beyond clinical skill. I started knowing things before I tested them. Not always, and not every session, not with every client, but with a frequency and a consistency that I could no longer attribute to pattern recognition or clinical experience alone. I would sit down with a client. We'd be in the intake conversation and something would come through, okay? A knowing, not a thought I generated, not a conclusion that I reasoned my way to, something that arrived quietly, clearly, before a single muscle test had been performed. And then I'd test and it would confirm over and over again. Now, I want to be careful here because I know how that sounds to the analytical mind. I had that analytical mind. I spent 30 years building it and depending on it and trusting it above almost everything else. So I'm not asking you to abandon yours, okay? I'm asking you to consider the possibility that the analytical mind, as powerful as it is not the only instrument available to us. Because here's what I came to understand through practice. The muscle test is a training ground. Every session, every test, every moment of placing your hands on the body and quieting your own noise long enough to receive what the body is communicating, that's not just clinical work. That's a discipline. It's closer to contemplative practice than it is to conventional diagnostics. You are training yourself session by session to get out of your own way, to stop generating and start receiving. And what happens when you do that consistently over 17 years is that the receiving capacity develops independent of the test itself. The instrument gets tuned. Think about what that means. An instrument doesn't generate the music, it transmits it. The quality of the transmission depends entirely on how well the instrument is tuned. A poorly tuned instrument introduces noise, distortion, interference, its own sound layered over what's trying to come through. And a well-tuned instrument gets out of the way. It becomes transparent to the signal. That's what 17 years of muscle testing did to me, not just as a clinician, as a human being, as a man. It tuned me. And I'll tell you exactly what it tuned me to, because this is the part I want to be most honest about on this milestone episode. It tuned me to God. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say it as a religious performance or a branding statement or because I think it's what someone wants to hear. I say it because it is the most accurate description I have of what happened to me through this work. The Navy cryptologist who trusted nothing he couldn't verify. The cybersecurity professional who built his career on finding the flaw in the system. The hard-nosed skeptic who sat in that room in Ely trying to catch a fraud. That man got quiet enough through enough years of disciplined practice to hear something he'd never been able to hear before. And what he heard was not random. It was not noise. It was not his own voice dressed up in spiritual language. It was something with a quality of otherness to it. A knowing that came from outside the boundaries of his own analytical capacity. A guidance that arrived before the question was fully formed. A hand, and I can only call it a divine guiding hand, that was present in the room with me and with my clients in ways I could feel but not fully explain. And when I sit with that, it, as humbly as I can possibly say it, it feels like I'm doing God's work with my clients. But here's what I want you to understand about that, okay? It didn't frighten me. It didn't confuse me. It didn't feel foreign or strange. It felt like recognition. Like something that had always been there, that I had finally gotten quiet enough to notice. The thesis statement I wrote in 2011, the muscle test is an agreement of interplay between expressions of the universe. I wrote that as a man who was reaching intellectually for a framework to hold something he was beginning to experience. I had the language, I had the conceptual scaffolding, What I didn't have yet was the depth of encounter that 15 more years of practice would bring. Because here's what that statement means to me, now standing on the other side of 17 years. We are all expressions of the universe. Every client who walks through my door, every person watching this right now, me, we are not separate systems bumping into each other in a material world. We are expressions of one thing, differentiated, individual, unique, but rooted in the same source. We're all connected, and the muscle test creates the conditions for an agreement between those expressions. The practitioner quiets himself enough to become a clear instrument. The client's innate intelligence, that organizing intelligence that runs the body without conscious direction, that knows what it needs and what is burdening it, and what will support it. That intelligence steps forward and speaks. And in the space between them, something happens that neither generated alone. That's not a metaphor. That's what I experience in the room. And what I've come to understand is that the intelligence the body carries, the innate intelligence that speaks through the muscle test, is not contained within the body. It's connected to something larger. And what that field is connected to is something that deserves a word larger than biology. I call it God. In fact, I created a Substack titled Beyond the Indicator Muscle, the Evolution of Muscle Testing in the Healing Field, and I chose that title deliberately, okay? Because the indicator muscle was never the destination. It was the entry point, the first step through the doorway. What's beyond it is not more technique. What's beyond it is a way of being in the world, a way of listening, a way of showing up for another human being with enough stillness and enough trust to become a clear channel for something that knows more than you do. That's what I became. Not through ambition, not through a curriculum, through showing up every day and and doing the work and letting the work do something to me in return. And I want to say one more thing about that, because I think it's important for anyone in this field who is earlier in their journey than I am, okay? You cannot manufacture this. You cannot shortcut it. You cannot learn it in a weekend course or extract it from a textbook or acquire it through a credential alone. It comes through time, through practice, through the accumulated weight of thousands of moments of genuine clinical presence with real human beings in real suffering. But it comes. If you stay in the room long enough, if you keep showing up, if you keep getting out of your own way and trusting what comes through rather than what you expect to find, if you keep walking through the doorway even when you can't fully see what's on the other side, it comes. And when it does, when you feel that knowing arrive before the test confirms it, when you sense that guiding hand in the room with you, when the agreement happens, and you watch someone's body begin to find its way back to itself, there's nothing in 17 years of clinical practice that compares to it. Nothing. That's why I'm still here. That's why there are 100 episodes. That's why there will be more, because the doorway is still open and I'm still walking through it. So let's talk about what this might mean for the person watching, okay? I know I'm over time, but let's keep rolling. Thank you for hanging with me. So that's the story, okay? From a room in Ely, Minnesota in 2009 to here. 100 episodes, 17 years of practice, a journey through skepticism and science and clinical evolution and spiritual awakening that I could not have mapped out in advance if I tried. And I want to speak directly to you now, okay? Not to the show, not to the camera, to you specifically. Because I know who watches this program. I know who finds their way here. And I want to make sure before we close today that I've said what needs to be said to each of you. If you've been here from the beginning or close to it, I want you to know something. You are part of this. Every time you showed up, every comment, every message, every person you sent this way because you thought they needed to hear it, that matters. The show exists because you kept showing up for it. And I don't take that lightly. 100 episodes is not something one person builds alone. So thank you, genuinely. And I want you to know the journey isn't finished. Not even close. I'm still learning, still evolving, still walking through the doorway. And what the next 100 episodes hold, I can't fully tell you yet. But I can tell you they will be honest. They will go deep, and they will continue to say the things that aren't being said anywhere else. That's a promise. Now, to the person who just found the show today, maybe you stumbled across this episode, maybe someone sent it to you. Maybe you've been quietly watching for a while and today was the day something finally pulled you in fully. However you got here, I'm glad you're here. And I want to speak to something specific because I know there's a version of you sitting where I sat in that room in Ely. Skeptical, analytical, maybe a little burned by a system that promised, answered, and delivered shrugs. Maybe carrying a health issue that hasn't responded to everything you've already tried. Maybe watching this and thinking, this is interesting, but I'm not sure I buy it. I understand that. I was that person, completely. And here's what I want to say to that person directly. I'm not asking you to believe anything today. I never ask that of anyone who comes into my practice. Belief isn't the entry requirement. Willingness is. The willingness to consider that the body is more intelligent than the system gives it credit for. The willingness to ask a different question than the one that hasn't been getting you answers. The willingness to stay in the room long enough to see what happens. That's all it took for me. I stayed in the room and everything changed. What I do is not for everyone. I want to be honest about that. I work with people who are ready to take ownership of their health at a root cause level. People who are done chasing symptoms and ready to find out what's actually driving them. People who are willing to commit to a real process, structured, sequential, individualized, and trust that process even when it asks something of them. If that's you, if you've been looking for someone who doesn't guess, who doesn't chase symptoms, who uses a clinical process designed to find the actual source of what's keeping you stuck, I want to talk to you. A Q&T assessment is where that conversation starts. It's a day one assessment that gives us a complete picture of what your body's innate intelligence is telling us about what it needs. From there, we build a plan that is entirely yours. No templates, no guesswork, just your body showing us the way. Okay? The link to get started is in the description below, or it's up in the profile. Or you can reach for me directly at jeff@evensonholistic.com, or find me at evensonholistic.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, Rumble, and X at Evenson Holistic or Dr. Jeff Evenson. And if today isn't that day for that, if you're still in the watching and listening phase, that's fine too. Stay here. Keep showing up. Keep asking questions. The conversation we have on the show every week is designed to give you something real, regardless of where you are in your journey. I started the show because I believed people deserved honest conversations about their health. Conversations that go deeper than the 15-minute appointment and the prescription pad. Conversations that treat you like an intelligent adult, capable of understanding what's actually happening in your body and making real decisions about it. 100 episodes later, I believe that more than ever. My master's thesis in 2011 was titled A New Normal. I wrote it as a skeptic trying to make sense of something that had already changed everything. 15 years later, I'm living it. And I can tell you from the inside, the new normal is better, deeper, more real, more connected to what actually matters than anything the old normal had to offer. That's what's available to you on the other side of the doorway. You just have to be willing to walk through it. So thank you for being here for episode 100. I'll see you next week. But before we go today, I want to do something. Sometimes I miss that at the end of the episode. I want to pray. Because after everything I've shared today, the journey, the doorway, the divine guiding hand that has been present in this work from the beginning, it would feel incomplete to close without acknowledging the one who made it all possible, the one who was in that room in Ely when my skepticism cracked, the one who has guided my hands in 17 years of clinical practice, the one whose intelligence I believe speaks through the body of every client who has ever trusted me with their health. So if you're willing, wherever you are right now, just take a breath and be here for a moment. Father, thank you. Thank you for the doorway, for opening it when I wasn't looking for it, when I wasn't ready for it, when I would have argued against it with everything I had. Thank you for being patient with the skeptic, for letting the evidence accumulate until it couldn't be denied, for meeting a Navy cryptologist exactly where he was and leading him somewhere he never could have found on his own. Thank you for 17 years of clients who trusted me with the most vulnerable and sacred thing they carry, their health. For every person who sat across from me and said, I've tried everything and I don't know where else to turn. For the privilege of being part of their healing, I don't take that lightly. I never have. I pray I never will. Thank you for the gift of this work, for the innate intelligence you placed inside every human body that knows what it needs and what burdens it and what will bring it back to wholeness. For the muscle test as a doorway into that intelligence, for every technique, every teacher, every course, every client who contributed to the practitioner I am today. Thank you for the 100 episodes, for the people who found their way here, for the conversations that went deeper than the conventional system allows, for the ones who heard something on the show that changed the question they were asking about their health. For everyone watching today, Father, I ask that you meet them where they are, the ones who are suffering and don't know why, the ones who have been told there's nothing more that can be done, the ones who are skeptical but still here, still watching, still somewhere inside them hoping there's another way. Meet them there, guide them to the right practitioners, the right conversations, the right next step on their healing journey. And for those you send my way, give me clean hands and a quiet mind. Keep me humble enough to receive what you're showing me and skilled enough to act on it well. Let me be a clear instrument in your hands for as long as you see fit to use me in this work. To you be the glory for all of it. In your name I pray. Amen. That's it, folks. Thank you again for listening and participating in episode 100. I love you guys. We'll talk to you later.